Hello, Jasmina. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you for inviting me. My pleasure. Okay, so I think I can start. So hello, guys. Good afternoon for me, maybe good morning or good night for you. As Jasmina said, my name is Maximiliano. You can call me Max. That's okay. I'm Firt on Twitter. And we're going to talk about performance for responsive web design. Okay. So I'm from Argentina. I'm actually here, right, in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, so pretty warm. I'm the author of Programming the Mobile Web and jQuery mobile app and running for O'Reilly Media. By the way, Programming the Mobile Web is the deal of the day, so you can get a pretty good discount on it. It has many translations to different languages, and I'm also the creator of the website mobile+html5.org, where you can find information about compatibility on each feature on HTML5 per platform, right, for mobile platforms only. So for today, I would like to go over a couple of topics based on performance for responsive web design. Basically, first, we're going to start talking about what are we doing with responsive today and what designers and developers are doing with responsive. Some myths about the mobile web and responsive in general. We're going to see something about wrong questions, and sometimes we are asking ourselves the wrong questions. So we're going to see why is the wrong question and what question should be the right one. Then mobile and responsive web design to understand the whole, let's say for now, problem. And finally, some tips to get both a faster experience and a responsive experience. Okay? So let's start. Before that, for Q&A, remember you can use the chat panel. Ask any question as you want. We will have plenty of time at the end to answer as many questions as you have. And if you are seeing this webcast in the recording, you can also reach me by Twitter at any time. So first, responsive ads. So maybe I'm pretty sure that some of you, I want to say most of you, but let's say some of you already know what the responsive website is, okay? But if not, basically, when we're talking about responsive web design, we're talking about the usage of at least 3 techniques. A fluid grid, that means that, for example, when you have 3 columns on the desktop, on the mobile phone, you switch the grid is fluid, so now you have 1 column only on the mobile phone. Flexible images, so it doesn't have, so let's say they don't have like fixed width or something like that, so images can adapt to different sizes and aspect radius. Finally, media queries. Media queries, it's part of the CSS specification. On CSS3, we have something new where we can, for example, change the CSS based on some context, for example, the screen size or the, let's say, the viewport size. So basically, this is what we usually call responsive web design. Before going on, let me tell you that the responsive web design right now is inside the list of buzzwords, right? As HTML5, still today, but let's say a couple of years ago, or Ajax, or rich internet applications, or Web 2.0, maybe 8 years ago. So that means that usually responsive web design today might have different definitions if you are talking to different people. And that's a problem, right? But the real original definition is using these 3 techniques at the same time: fluid grids, flexible images, and media queries. So that means usually that we're going to serve to the users HTML5 content with CSS3, JavaScript, and images. The same group of files are serving for desktops, tablets, phones, small phones, smartphones, phablets, right, like these 6-inch phones, smart TVs, maybe smartwatches, or even Google Glass, right? So that's the idea that most of you might have about the idea of responsive web design, right? So and I'm pretty sure that you think that usually when we are doing this, means that, for example, when we are delivering content for the desktop, we are not delivering some CSS content or images that are suitable for tablets, okay, or that are suitable for phones. So the idea usually is that we are serving one HTML file, always the same file, but on the CSS side and on the images side, we are just serving the files that match the current device. That's the idea, right? So that means that with the same HTML code, we can have the same content with different layouts on different devices. And sometimes, for example, in this case, we can have a fourth red part of our page that is hidden on tablets, and even it can be more aggressive on phones, where we are not showing all the information on the same HTML. So that's the, let's say, big rough idea of responsive web design that most of you may have. Usually, also responsive web design comes with some brothers, right, or some, maybe children, responsive something. For example, responsive images, responsive tables, responsive video, responsive forms, responsive ads. So basically, it's basically all the same thing that we are serving for the desktop or on the classic websites, that we need to make them responsive, right? So they can adapt themselves to different screen sizes. So that's one idea. I'm not saying that's completely true. I'm saying that that's the idea behind responsive web design. 1 in 8 websites today is responsive based on the top 100 websites around the world. So it's a good number. And I have to say that from my point of view, unfortunately, a lot of companies and web designers and web developers are thinking of responsive web design as a goal, right? So I'm seeing a lot of people saying, hey, I have a new website, and my new website now is responsive, right? So, or we need to start a new project, and the new project, the name of the new project is the responsive website. So that's the goal, right? So it seems like we need to achieve responsive website. Sometimes the problem is that we don't know why, right? But it seems like, okay, we need to make a responsive website. So everybody is proud of their responsive website. But sometimes it's not clear why you are doing a responsive website. So the problem is that the responsiveness of a website, it's not basically a goal, right? So we should have different goals, not being responsive. And I will talk about that later, just a couple of minutes. So you can find a lot of newspapers, websites that are proudly saying, we now have a responsive website, okay? So I'm not saying that's bad, right? I'm just saying they're just focusing not on a new experience, they're just saying it's a responsive website. And you can find plenty of examples of this idea, right? Even on newspapers, they're writing articles on their printed newspaper saying, we have a new responsive website, right? Even if you search in Google, you will find hundreds and thousands of websites being proud of their new responsive versions. So for now, responsive is being used usually in companies as a goal, okay? From our point of view, responsive is a technique or a set of techniques, a tool, right, that we can use to achieve some goals. But it shouldn't be the goal. It helps us basically on designing for the multi-screen, for different screen sizes. That's the main idea. Now let's get into myths. So I have been in the mobile web environment since 1999, right? So think about the mobile phone in 1999, okay? So it's very different. So I remember people from all over these years saying different things. For example, in 1999, basically everybody was saying nobody will browse the web on a tiny screen, okay? A couple of years later, basically the mobile web was basically creating a WAP site. So using WML and that some kind of strange languages, not so webby, I mean, in terms of HTML. A couple of years after that, right, basically an idea appeared that there is no mobile web, right? Just the web. Even there was a name called the one web. It's just one web. So that's basically true, right? It's just one web. We are just accessing the same Twitter account, the same Facebook account. We are reading the same newspaper, okay? So it's not a different web that we have on mobile. But it's a different device, okay? So from a user's perspective, it shouldn't be a different web. It's just the web. It's just the New York Times, right? But from our point of view, I'm talking about designers, developers, web producers, it's a different web because we need to use different techniques. So that's why mobile web still exists from a developer's perspective, okay? After the iPhone, basically, the idea was that your classic website works well on mobile, so we don't need a mobile-specific version anymore because the iPhone and then Android and all other devices can basically read properly any website, okay? Of course, you need to scroll, zoom, pan, right, and find information inside, but it works, okay? 4 years ago, basically the mobile web was creating a small width for the iPhone, right, 320 pixels width, and that's a mobile web, okay? So, and now, I'm hearing that every website should be responsive, okay? So that's what I'm hearing right now. And from my point of view, all these myths are the same thing, right? All these ideas are the same. All these ideas are that designers or producers, we want an easy solution for mobile devices, right? So we always want something easier. So we don't want to get into the mess of the mobile web. By the way, the second edition of my book, Priming the Mobile Web, is more than 700 pages, right? 700 pages of specific information about the mobile web environment. So unfortunately, right, there is no simple solution, unfortunately, yet, for mobile devices. We still need to understand how they work. We need to do something special, okay? Because I don't have enough time here to talk about all the problems that we have on mobile, but it's not just the screen size, okay? So that's not the easy problem. But I have seen a lot of designers and developers that they don't want to hear about the mobile problems, right? They want mobile to be as easy as desktop. The problem is that the reality is different, okay? So we need to face the reality. So the mobile was always complicated from a web developer's perspective. We always wanted to ignore it, right? But we shouldn't ignore it, right? Mobile is more important every day, and we need to understand mobile. I have seen so many big companies with big budgets spent in advertisement, and when you try to access that website or web app from a mobile phone, it crashed, and it's insane, right? So there is no silver bullet here. So there is no one solution that will solve all your problems, unfortunately. Now, let's talk about the wrong questions, okay? So a couple of weeks ago, I think it's about 2 months ago, the New York Times has released a new website, right? So they have redesigned the web experience. It's pretty nice. It's very fast, by the way. So it's responsive, okay? So it's a responsive website. However, they still have a mobile version. So when you access the New York Times from a mobile phone, you will not get the desktop responsive website. You will get the mobile responsive website. And how is that? So wasn't responsive for solving the problem of mobile? Even there are some people talking about this. So, for example, there are some blogs or technical magazines, they were saying like the latest New York Times web app misses the point of responsive design because the new HTML5 version doesn't support smartphones. And my question here is, who said that the point of the responsive design was to support smartphones? So maybe that's one implementation that on some situations seems a good idea, but that's not true, right? So nobody says that responsive web design is for mobile. In fact, responsive web design, so every time you see RWD is responsive web design, so it's not the replacement of understanding mobile or even creating a mobile-specific version. It's not a replacement. And if you don't believe me, right, maybe you can see what Ethan has said about this. Ethan is the author of Responsive Web Design book, and he's basically the creator of the idea of responsive web design. And on his book, he said, responsive web design isn't intended to serve as a replacement for mobile websites. So it's not a replacement, okay? So your goal shouldn't be responsive. Your goal is to have more conversions. Being conversions wherever you want to mean. So it can be more users visiting your content. It can be more people subscribing to something, more people buying things, wherever you want, right? So you want people to be happy, your users to be happy. That should be your goal. And the question is, if you do responsive, does it mean more conversions, more happy users? Are you sure about that? I mean, I'm just thinking, are you asking you this question yourself? So you should ask this question yourself, okay? So if responsive means more happy people, let me share another quote, in this case for Brad Frost. Users don't give a, right, if your site is responsive. So let's say users don't care if your site is responsive. And that's completely true, okay? So just take your mom or any member of your family that is not technical and ask him about or her about responsiveness of a website, right? People don't care about responsive web design or responsive websites, okay? So that's not the important thing. We are missing the point, right? When we are making responsive web design the goal, the most important thing that we need to achieve. So I'm seeing a lot of designers, even a lot of people send me information on Twitter or on different events around the world. They show me their new website, and they show me how responsive the website is. So they resize the browser, and for me, they look like talking to their mom as a child, right? Look, ma, I resized the browser's window, and it's responsive. Usually I'm saying, I mean, it's cool, but what was your goal here? Right? Do you have information? Do you have a stat saying that your users are resizing the browser? Maybe yes. Maybe you do. You're having that kind of information, but maybe not. Right? By the way, it seems like I don't like responsive web design, but that's not true for now. You're going to see. So the other problem here is that besides the desktop and people resizing the browser's window, we have mobile devices, right? And we don't have yet like flexible or stretchable mobile devices. So if I have an iPhone, it will be an iPhone forever. It will not convert to an iPad, so I need to relay out everything. Of course, there are some situations, like for example, orientation, portrait, and landscape. But basically, on mobile devices, your mobile device is always the same. Okay. So why do we need code that will resize and relay out everything on an iPhone? Because it will never happen, right? So your goal should be usability, speed and performance, accessibility, right? And provide the best possible experience on each device and context. Sometimes responsive web design can be a solution or an answer to these goals, okay? Sometimes it's not the answer. So speed and velocity, okay, it should be one of your top priorities. Unfortunately, again, here, I don't have enough time to talk about this, but if you have never played with the idea of web performance optimization, right, I encourage you to go and grab a book, look for some videos on YouTube, and you will find a lot of information about why performance is so important, okay? So responsive web design is just a tool, okay, that can help us on some situations to achieve our goals of usability, performance, and the best experience for each context. Okay, but it's just one tool that you can use. It's not the only tool, and it's not definitely the goal. right? You don't want a responsive website. You want a fast, easy-to-use website. Maybe responsive is the answer to that. And responsive, again, I'm repeating the same thing, is not a silver bullet, okay? So don't ask yourself the wrong questions. So first, responsive design, don't replace mobile solutions, okay? If not a go, users will not care about responsive design, right? They will just care about usability, about speed. So users, just think about yourself as a user when you're waiting for the bus and you're trying to access a website. You want a fast experience and you want to access the content or the service you are looking for as fast as possible. That's the only goal as a user, right? If you're using a responsive website to providing me that, great. But I don't care if it's responsive, a mobile, a specific solution. I mean, it's not my I don't want to say decision, right, as a user, but even it's not part of the typical user's knowledge, right, if you ask about responsiveness of a website. So usually responsive web design comes because we have mobile devices, right? So that's why we need something, or designers as a whole, by the way, I'm more a developer than a designer. But usually we need responsive web design because we want to have a solution for mobile devices. So let's talk about mobile first. First, don't underestimate mobile browsers. So I'm seeing this a lot also. People and designers, they don't want to understand the mobile ecosystem, the mobile world. They're just resizing their desktop browsers to simulate a mobile phone, okay? And they think that's a mobile phone. That's how it looks like on a mobile phone. Well, no. It's far more complicated than that. In fact, how many browsers do you know on mobile? Okay, if you're counting right now, maybe you're going to answer 3, 4, right? But it's far more complex than that. And let me show you a quick example, just a quick example. For example, let's take just Android, okay? So on Android, the default browser until Android 4.3, that is 98% of the Android devices out there, come with Android browser. So these devices don't have, for example, Google Chrome. They have Android browser. That was the default browser on Android, okay? In each version of Android, like 2.3, that is still 30% of the people browsing the web. Android from 4 to 4.3, 4.4, and even on Samsung devices like the Galaxy S4, the browser is different. It's like a whole new browser, okay? So in terms of performance, in terms of compatibility, in terms of how things look like, so you should understand that the mobile web is more complex than the desktop one. In fact, even this Android browser should be tested, right, on 3,000 devices because you may have different experiences. Of course, I'm not saying to you that you should test on 3,000 devices. So there are some patterns and best practices to solve the problem. But for now, it's not like resizing your window. It's far more complex than that, okay? Then we have, for example, Google Chrome now that is getting more people and more users. It's around 10% of the Android market share in terms of web browsing. But Google Chrome is one of the best browsers in terms of performance and compatibility, but it's not there yet on all the Android phones. And even Google Chrome is available on iOS, for example, on iPhone and iPad. And Google Chrome on iOS is not even Google Chrome from a developer's perspective. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but Chrome on iOS is using something called the web view. And the web view, for now, let's say that it's like a Safari embedded inside a Chrome UI. But it's Safari from a web developer's perspective, okay? Of course, we have Safari on iOS, for iPhone, for iPad. We have Opera in different versions that is around 20% of the market share in terms of browsing. We have Firefox for Android. Now we have Firefox OS, that is a whole operating system based on Firefox. We have our friend IE, right, on Windows Phone. Amazon Silk, that's another browser for Android because it's a browser inside the Kindle Fire series, right, the tablet from Amazon. And also you have UC Web or UC Browser that is around 5 to 8% of the global market share. That is mostly on Asia, in the Chinese market, in the Indian market. So mobile browsing is far more complex. It's not just about the screen size, okay? So don't underestimate the mobile ecosystem if you want to have a successful, responsive site for mobile devices, okay? The other thing here about mobile is that mobile browsing is slower than desktop. And I know what you're thinking, or some of you are thinking. It depends on where you're living right now. But maybe if you are on some European countries or in the States, maybe you're thinking, hey, we have 4G. We don't need to worry about performance anymore, right? But that's not true. That's not true, even if you are in 4G. That not everybody is in 4G. So let me show you some data from this is from Keynote. Keynote is a company doing some performance software. They have a blog, and they blogged about the last Super Bowl advertisers. So they have checked their websites and measured their websites in terms of performance. Basically, half of these advertisers have a mobile version, so a desktop version and a mobile version. As you can see, the mobile version, in average, was around 800K, the whole homepage, HTML, CSS, JavaScript files, and images. Half of these advertisers, even more than half, were responsive web design solutions. Okay, so if you were accessing these websites from a mobile phone, you downloaded more than 3 megabytes. Right, so 3 megabytes. This is about 4 times the size of the advertisers with a mobile solution. Okay. So, and this means in time. Okay. So here you can see, you can check the blog. You will find all the information and a better resolution of this graph. But basically, the orange lines are time for a mobile phone. Then you have desktop and tablet. So as you can see, for every advertiser, the time for loading the website on a mobile phone is always higher. Even on some others, it's around a minute. So basically, the maximum value here is 60 seconds. So 60 seconds to load a website that was advertised on TV, on the Super Bowl. So that's a lot. You are losing a lot of people and money here, right? So you should be very careful about the idea of 4G being faster or equal as browsing on desktop. And let me show you why does this happen. Because when you're talking about 3G or 4G, you're usually talking about the bandwidth. Okay, so you say, okay, on 2G we are less than half a megabit per second. On 3G it can be up to 5 megabits per second, and on 4G, of course, it's much more. But the bandwidth, it's not so important when you're browsing the web, okay? Because when you're browsing the web, you're just downloading small files, okay? A lot of small files. So the bandwidth is more interesting for example, a YouTube video, because it's a big transfer, okay? When you look at the same information but about latency and not bandwidth, you will see that the latency is on 2G up to 1 second. The latency is basically the time that the request takes to get a response, right? Just an empty request, right? Just to get the response. And on 3G, it's up to half a second. In 4G, it's better, but it's still 200 milliseconds per request, okay? 200 milliseconds per request. Just for you to compare, in US, right, a home wire connections, it's around 20 to 45. So that means that even on 4G, it's 5 times bigger, the latency, than on desktop. So it's not about the bandwidth. It's about the latency and other problems that I don't have enough time here to talk about that. So basically, the latency is always there. It doesn't matter the length of the files. Of course, the length of the file is important, right? That's why I was saying that 3 megabytes maybe is too much for a mobile experience, but the latency is even worse. Okay, and the latency is always there, at least if you are not applying some techniques called as web performance optimization. Okay. So responsive web design by default is harming performance by default. So if you apply responsive web design techniques by the book, right, you are harming performance on mobile devices. I'm not saying that you cannot do it right, but I'm saying that by default, if you're just caring about the responsiveness of the website, you are harming performance. And another information from Guy, you can get the blog on that URL. Basically, on a typical website today, responsive website, right, 3/4 of these websites, they have the same size on desktop, on mobile, on tablet. So the same HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and images are being delivered to all the devices. Okay? So if on desktop you are delivering 3 megabytes, you are also delivering 3 megabytes on mobile, on the mobile phone, on 3G, or even on 2G. So only 20% are slightly smaller. That's the red area here. And on the blue area, it's much smaller. It's less than 10%. These websites are the ones that are really caring about performance. They're delivering smaller files to mobile phones. Okay? So I know what you're thinking, because I told you, or maybe you think, that when you're applying responsive web design, you're just delivering the right CSS and the right images to each device. So one for desktop, one for tablet, one for mobile devices or smartphones. And unfortunately, the bad news for you is not how it works by default. So that means that in terms of the browsers, right, usually the browsers by default, the browser will deliver all the CSS files, all the images to all the devices, right? So you will get the 3 megabytes to all the devices, even there are 1 megabyte of images and CSS that you are not using on mobile. Okay, so that's the default, let's say, experience that users are having right now. Because even if you're a web designer and you understand what a media query is, and you're thinking right now, hey, but I have a media query saying that this CSS is only valued for devices less than 400 pixels, for example, or viewports with a width lower than 400 pixels. So you think that CSS file will be downloaded only by those browsers, for example, an iPhone. But that's not completely true, because a lot of browsers are still downloading that CSS file, maybe with a different priority for later usage, because they think that the width value might change in the future. So they have the CSS. If you said, go and grab the CSS, maybe they will need that CSS later. Okay, so by default, we have a problem here. Even there is one thing here. There is still no relationship between screen size and bandwidth, right? So it doesn't matter if you are, for example, on a tablet because maybe the tablet is using 3G. And you shouldn't deliver maybe super retina images, super high resolution images, because you are harming performance, because the problem is how the data is coming from the server. No, the screen size where you're rendering the page. So don't penalize your users because they are mobile. That's what you're doing right now if you're not caring about performance and just caring about responsive web design. You are sending CSS code big images that will never render on that device, okay? So it's useless, completely useless. In fact, it's not just useless. You are harming the performance for your users, and that means your users will not be happy, and that means you are losing conversion. So don't underestimate mobile browsing. Understand how the mobile web world works, okay? I know it's not easy, right? You have an opportunity today. You have the deal of the day, my book, okay? But learn to test and measure on your own mobile phones. Don't rely on your desktop browser and just resizing the browser's window. So don't penalize your users when they are on mobile. Just deliver them a good and fast experience for that device. I'm not saying that you should minimize. That means remove features. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the files you're sending, okay, over the network. So until now, I was just giving you bad news, okay? So now let's talk about how can we get a faster and responsive experience at the same time. Because we can do it well or right, okay? It's not like responsive web design is bad. So again, just to reinforce the same concept, don't get me wrong. I'm not against responsive web design. I'm against responsive web design as a goal, right, without any other ideas. So responsive web design is a great tool, right, to provide the fluid design to different experiences, but sometimes you need to add other techniques or use other techniques at the same time to achieve your real goals, right? Performance, usability. So one idea is that you can start from mobile and not from desktop. So I have seen a lot of web designers creating responsive experiences starting from desktop. So they start from the desktop design and then they start adding or changing the CSS and the layout so they can adjust everything to mobile phones and tablets. So try to start from mobile, okay? Sometimes this is called mobile-first responsive web design. So start from mobile, so you will get the basic layout, and then you will add, using progressive enhancement, that's another design pattern or another technique, you can add different things for different screen sizes or even different behaviors, because sometimes it's not just about the screen size. Just let me give you a really, really quick example. So on mobile phones, you can have a link so people can call you, right? So you can start a call from a link. So, but that's useless on desktop and that's useless on tablets, okay? So you cannot use media queries and responsive web design to change that. So, or geolocation, for example. I know that geolocation is also on desktop, but usually it's not so interesting. But if you are creating, I don't know, the Starbucks website, maybe on the mobile phone you want to have a geolocation feature to locate the nearest Starbucks to you, and maybe on the desktop you don't have that feature. So it's not just about the screen size, it's about other things. So you can use feature detection. There are different techniques that will help you and will give more value to the responsive design, okay? So start from mobile. Inline the initial view, okay? So there is an idea, right, that right now in the last year it was promoted by some guys, some performance guy, even guys from Google, that we should deliver the mobile experience, the first load experience in 1 second, right? 1 second is it's a lot for performance. So you can inline the initial view. That means forget about all the things above the fold in a mobile device, okay? Just deliver quick HTML and inline CSS, and then using JavaScript, you will load all the other information. So people will, your users, right, will be happier, a lot happier. Conditional loading means that, because I told you that some browsers are still downloading CSS and sometimes even images that you think that are for other kind of device. Okay, so you can use conditional loading. There are a lot of frameworks out there that will help you with this, or you can use just plain JavaScript. Modern browsers support the matchMedia function that acts like a media query on JavaScript. So instead of adding the link elements for CSS, for media queries, saying, okay, this CSS is for mobile, this CSS is for tablets, this CSS is for desktop, you can use JavaScript. You can just load the basic CSS, even inline sometimes, for all the devices, and then you use a matchMedia conditional if statement on JavaScript, and you say, okay, if it's a mobile phone, I will just inject the CSS for phones. I don't need to inject the CSS for tablet just in case, okay? Because the phone will be a phone forever, at least that session. So you can use conditional loading. The basic styling, right, should be outside of AdMedia. So don't repeat or don't create just exclusive CSS files. I have seen this a lot too, right? So, okay, so one CSS is exclusive with the other. No, you should have the basic styling outside of any AdMedia declaration. So it's basically a CSS for everybody. And then using the conditional loading, you will load the right CSS and images per platform. There is one thing, okay, maybe we still want to change the layout when you're resizing the desktop browser's window. You can still use matchMedia, or you can use the old resize event to maybe do something about that, right? But there is just one situation, only one situation where I think that resizing the browser, I mean, it's a use case, right? So people resizing the browser a lot. And that's Windows 8 with the Windows 8 mode Internet Explorer, where you can basically have two apps at the same time, and you can narrow the window, so there is something there, but I don't have any data, any real data about how many users are really doing that. Then, you should cascade AdMedia from a small to large, not large to a small, okay? So you should cascade the AdMedias. It depends. Of course, you should sit down and create your own policy here. There is no silver bullet here. There is no manual. You should sit down, understand how responsive works, and then understand how performance should be, and then apply the right decision. Test on real devices, okay? So, for example, use a real iPhone, a real Android, and verify if you're using a display none, for example, to hide something, if you have images inside, or even if you have custom fonts inside, and you think that they shouldn't be downloaded from mobile phones, you can test on a real phone if it's being downloaded or not, okay? So be careful with that, because sometimes things are not how you think they are. Responsive images, you should use JavaScript, unfortunately, because there is no standard yet. We are near a final decision, but for now, it's just JavaScript to load the right image, even when we are talking about low resolution and high resolution. Maybe you can create a smart responsive solution by groups. And I think that the new New York Times website is inside this group. So you can create a responsive web design for big screens, so you can adapt yourself to some small variations in terms of width, and maybe tablets can be there, you can take, but most tablets are on Wi-Fi, but there are some tablets on 3G, but you say, okay, it's a big screen. And for a small screen, that 95% are at least 3G capable. They might be in Wi-Fi too, but you can create responsive web design solutions for small screens, where you use different techniques because you have more performance problems and issues there. And why do you need responsive there? Because you still need to change the layout on landscape. You still need to manage different real sizes. Like, for example, you have an iPhone, you have small Android, you have bigger Androids, you have like phablets, like the Galaxy Note that is big, it's a really big phone. Maybe you need to do something around that, right, and different platforms. So responsive web design is a tool that you can use also if you create two different sites. There is no place saying that if you're using responsive web design, you must use the same HTML to every device. I haven't seen that rule, okay? And finally, there is something called REST, okay? Responsive design with server-side components. That means using feature and device detection server-side, okay? And most websites, including typical responsive websites such as the Boston Globe, they're using this technique, okay? So it's responsive design, but server-side, we are making some decisions. So we are not sending all the files to the client so the client can make the decision, and sometimes it's the wrong decision. We are making a decision on the server. So we are serving maybe based on the same HTML server-side, but we are removing things before sending that file to the client. And I know what you're thinking, because I'm doing trainings a lot, and that's usually what people is saying. Okay, but we are front-end engineers, okay? So if we need to go and talk to the back-end engineers to do something, maybe we need to wait a year, right? Because different teams, different goals here, okay? So if you're a JavaScript developer or an HTML or CSS designer, you want to make decisions about the responsiveness of your website, and you need to give that responsibility to a .NET, Java, or PHP or Python developer. And maybe it's not in the same, let's say, it's not in the same page as you in terms of priorities. So maybe, and this is just forward thinking, I'm not the only one saying this, by the way, maybe we should start thinking about a new server architecture, okay? So now we have the client and the server, we have front-end engineers and designers, and back-end engineers and database administrators on the server, okay? And maybe we did something in the middle. And something in the middle means, call it however you want, right? But it's basically a server-side thing that is managed by the front-end team. So where you're not accessing the databases, you're not accessing the security thing, you are just making small decisions, right, based on feature detection and device detection to serve a better HTML and that will perform better, okay? So this is just an idea. Mostly if you're working in a small or big company and you have a team, maybe you can add this little light layer that can be Node.js or something like that can help you working with REST, with responsive web design, with some server-side decisions. So you can get faster and responsive at the same time if you understand what you're doing. So performance should be priority, right? Use responsive design as a tool. Hack the technique if necessary, for example, using JavaScript instead of CSS media queries. Think about adding some server-side logic. Usually it's a good idea to provide performance. By the way, there are a couple of websites, mostly content-only based websites, that don't need too much of these hacks or server-side logic. So you can create a fast and responsive solution just with responsive design. But that's not the general rule, okay? It's more than the exception. So responsive design is a great tool, right? If you know how, when, right, to use it. Don't use responsive web design just because it's cool, just because everybody's talking about it, okay? Don't use it as a goal, because it seems like, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's basically what's happening here, right? So a lot of people are learning responsive web design, and they think, oh, great, this is the solution for everything, okay? So if you need to choose between your designer and your user pick your user. Okay, your user needs to be happy, not your designer. If you can get both, great, right? But your users go first, because you don't want your user to be angry, right? And you don't want your users to be frustrated. And that's what you're getting today, right? Angry users, frustrated users. So think about that, right? And use responsive web design with responsibility. Okay? Thank you. That was all. I'm even on time.
What a great webcast, Maximiliano. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and expertise with us. We have many questions that have come in. Are you able to see them?
Yes.
Okay.
So, a lot of questions here. So let's start with any thought on responsive emails? Well, that's another big topic. So responsive, remember responsive start? So responsive everything. So I have played with responsive emails. So responsive emails right now, it's a couple of hacks basically that you need to apply. So the idea is, if I can send an email that can have different layouts for Gmail for Android, for the Mail app on iPhone, and also for Gmail on the desktop and Outlook. Okay, so there are a couple of techniques basically based on tables, right, and some inline CSS. So unfortunately, that's the only solution right now. So a couple of hacks. There are a couple of frameworks out there. So if you look for frameworks on responsive emails, you will find a couple. So next question from Maya or Maja. Some developers argued for desktop first because IE8 and earlier versions don't handle the mobile first approach well. Most users are using IE8 and earlier. So first, let's start with that. So most users are using IE8. It's not the right idea. So some users are using IE8, yes, of course. Not most, but some. So the question was finally, is desktop first a good decision in this case when it costs more in the long run? Well, first, I don't think that desktop first is a good idea, right? You should, desktop first means, okay, I will care about my desktop users and then we'll see, okay, what will happen with mobile. But if you have a lot of IE8 users, well, you should think about that first. You can do responsive web design for IE8 because IE8 doesn't support media queries. And that's the first media query. It supports the basic media queries, not the CSS3 media queries. And that will give you enough information on your code to say, okay, that means the guy is on IE8. So you can basically do responsive web design for IE8. From John Erickson, instead of client front-end server, back-end server in different languages, how about a unified approach like Google Dart? I'm not sure, John, if I'm getting what do you mean with the question, right? Back-end server in different languages. What I was saying with that idea is the client front-end server is that you can add like a layer. It can be the same language as your back-end server or a different language. It's just a small light layer where web designers or front-end engineers have permissions to make decisions, right? Even it can be a little framework that your back-end developers can make for you. But the idea is that right now, back-end decisions are usually of the back-end team. And these decisions should be the front-end team, right? Next question from Javier. Why from small to large? Can you elaborate? Well, that's how you can optimize responsive web design, right? From a small to large. It's always easier, faster to go from small to large than from large to small. Because if you go from large to small, usually you need to override everything, or you need to just make an exclusive CSS. So you say, okay, this is for desktop, the large screen. And now for mobile, forget about the desktop, and this is the other CSS. So going from small to large, then you are saying, okay, this is for mobile, and for tablet, you take the mobile plus this, right? That it's usually more complicated to do it when you start from large. Next question from Thomas, how difficult is to make a non-responsive site into a responsive site? Well, you're talking about two specific things like going from one CSS framework like 9.6 TGS and Bootstrap. So usually it's not so easy, okay? Because when you're saying that you're going from a non-responsive to a responsive, you're usually saying you're going from a classic desktop website to a responsive website. So it's the same thing I was saying before. Going from large to a small, using the same HTML, right, without changing the HTML, usually it's not easy, right? Usually it's better to start from scratch. I know a lot of companies that they have started to trying to move the desktop site to a responsive site, and they have or a very bad solution in terms of performance, or they have decided to start from scratch with a new project. Next question from Cheryl. Which frameworks will help you with conditional loading? Well, I can give you a couple of ones. There is one called, let me see, I have a list here around. So maybe I will use the chat later, or I will tweet about them, because I have a couple of links that will be better. But there are a couple of frameworks that you can use. There is one called ECSS something. I don't remember, but I have it here. So I will give you some links on Twitter for those of you that are interested in that. My Twitter is FIRT. Let me find again the window with the questions. Here we are. So Jennifer, regarding padding and responsiveness, is there much difference in how different browsers display the same CSS? So this is a typical question like 5 years ago. So right now, if you're talking about padding, right, I think you're talking about the problem of the box model on IE. I think that's not the problem anymore. Okay, so do you have differences in how CSS is being applied? Yes, on some specific situation. On basic styling, on basic laying out, more or less, if you're talking about the mature CSS standards and specs, they work pretty well on all the browsers. If you're talking about some new stuff, such as CSS Flexible Box, well, you have like two different specs in the market, the new spec and the old spec, and maybe you need to wait a couple of months to start using that with the same code for every browser. Next question from Alfredo. What about high DPI mobile displays, which are now common? So they won't be detected as mobile based on a screen width. Okay, so I understand the question from Alfredo. So Alfredo thinks that if your mobile phone is, let's say, full HD, right, and it has a very super dense high definition screen, then on a media query, right, you should use the real value, right? So, for example, if you have, let's say, an iPhone 4, okay, or the iPhone 5, right? The iPhone 5 has 640 pixels of width, okay, if you look at the spec, the technical specs. However, your media query should not be 640, because maybe you're thinking, 640 is like a tablet, right? And I have a Nexus 5, and maybe a Nexus 5 looks like a desktop, okay? Because in pixels, it's like a desktop. So how can in media query, how can I differentiate a mobile phone from a desktop? Well, the reality is that you're missing one important part here, is that when you're talking about mobile devices, and now some desktop devices too, there is another idea. So you're talking about CSS pixels when you're using media queries. And CSS pixels is a virtual unit. So my Nexus 5 and my original Nexus 1 that I have with a very different density, they have the same viewport declaration. So from a media query point of view, you will get the same value. That, I mean, just giving you a quick idea, mobile phones usually are below 400 pixels, CSS pixels, even iPhone 4 and iPhone 5. Phablets are between 400 and 600. Tablets, 7 inches, are between 600 and 800, and usually 800 or more it's a desktop or 1,000 CSS pixels. Okay. How can I weight a responsive site on a mobile device to see its total KB? Well, there are a couple of online solutions, so that you can just type your URL and see how it looks like in terms of performance. You can search for site speed from Google. There is a solution from Akamai called Mobitest. You can use your own phone to measure performance. So there are a lot of information here. On my blog, mobile+web.com, or my book, you will find a lot of links, right, or Google. Can you talk about image sizes for retina displays on mobile and desktop? Well, that's from Heidi. That's similar to a previous question. So, I mean, I have like an hour to talk about that. So, for now, let's say that my Nexus 5 and probably a future iPhone, they are 3 times bigger than average devices in terms of density, screen density. And when we're talking about images, usually we say, okay, then we need to deliver a 3 times bigger image. In fact, it's 9 times bigger because 3 of width, 3 of height. So a 9 times bigger image on the same 3G network, maybe it's not a good idea. So you need to find the balance between having the right quality of the picture and the size of the transfer. Last 2 questions, guys. So question from Luis, how is Browser Stack for testing on mobile? So Browser Stack is a company that is offering solutions for testing on different browsers, so you can test on different browsers. As far as I know, and as far as I have played with Browser Stack a few months ago, they're working with emulators and simulators. So it depends on what do you want to test. So that's another thing, right? Talking about testing and debugging on mobile devices, it's another hour. But so you're using, it's using emulators and simulators. So if you want to test performance, maybe it's not a good idea because it's not the real performance. If you want to test if you want to see how it looks like, maybe it's good enough. Final question here from Renato. Is there also a way of doing responsive content too? I think that you're trying to say with responsive content the idea of, for example, having one paragraph for desktop and 1 paragraph for mobile, so it's a shorter paragraph. So there are no ways to do that easily, right? So now if you want to do that, you need to hide a div on desktop and show another div on mobile and something like that, or use a server-side solution that will make the decision. So there is no easy way to do that, really. Okay? So I think, I'm not sure if I need to reload if I have more than one. Oh yeah, I have more here. Okay, so I have a couple of more minutes, so if you are still there, I can still answer more questions. So next question from Gori. Is it reliable to use emulators? For example, the Chrome DevTools or for testing responsive web design? Well, that's another big topic, emulators and simulators. The answer is that it's okay for a quick testing, right? For a quick test and see how it works, but it's not reliable. So it's getting better. Even the last version of Chrome is getting better. But for example, now you have support for the viewport meta tag, so you can simulate the viewport, but you still need to test on real phones, unfortunately. Let's see. Any recommendations for retrofitting very old websites? Well, if it's a very old website, but very old, from the 90s, right, from 1995, maybe it's responsive, because the web was responsive 20 years ago, because we weren't using tables for layout or divs or something like that. If you're using tables, unfortunately, you need to start from scratch. I cannot suggest you something quick and easy. There are magic solutions that will take your table and will convert it to something else, but it's a magic solution. Let's see, there are a couple of questions that were already answered, so I will mark them. Jeffrey is saying, is there any way to easily tell without using multiple devices if a site is built with responsive web design? Well, usually resizing your window on desktop will give you an idea. If the website is changing the layout, maybe it's a good sign. But if they're using responsive web design with server-side components like REST, then you will not know. You can change the user agent and see if it's changing. So there are ways, right, but not a so easy way. Question from Gory. How do you make a difference between websites that have a mobile version and the ones that don't? Well, besides testing on a mobile device, you can use Google Chrome or Firefox or IE tools to change the user agent that will basically simulate to the server that you are a mobile phone, and you will see if you are receiving a different HTML. So that's the only way. Final question I have here: how best to perform a service-side decision based on REST? Client passing user agent string. So the question is basically how REST work, right? So what are you going to do server-side? So usually the best answer is to use a server-side library. There are some frameworks, some open source frameworks, some commercial frameworks, such as Device Atlas, Whirlpool from the company called Scientia Mobile, that they have APIs available for different browsers, even for the cloud, and they will detect the device that is accessing your website so you can make a decision. So you can ask server-side if it's a tablet, if it's a mobile phone, if it's an iPhone, if the screen size is greater than, and then you can make the quick decisions of which CSS to show or which part of HTML to hide. So that's usually the best way. If you're trying to use the user agent on your own, if you are to guess the device using the user agent on your own, it won't be an easy task, near impossible. So usually try to use these frameworks. So I think that's all I have here. So thank you very much again. Just a quick reminder, my book, Programming the Mobile Web, with all the information, that 700 pages, is on the deal of the day if you want to take advantage of that. That's all.